Today on Blue 58, the Packers are in need of some help at linebacker, but what help is there to be had? Let's take a look at this year's class of prospects.
Blue 58!
Hello and welcome to another episode of Blue 58, the one and only podcast of thepowersweep.com. I am your host, John Meerdink, and I am very happy to be with you here for another episode because the news, it comes fast and furious at random times during the offseason, and the Packers are the subject of a bit more news today. First and foremost, we've got a new kickoff rule. The Packers were one of the teams that voted against it, but the NFL has moved forward with a new-look kickoff for 2023. You'll probably see this referred to as the XFL-style kickoff, which is a good comp. It's not exactly the same one-to-one, but basically what the NFL is trying to set up here is an environment where a kicker kicks a high kick that lands near the 5 to 10-yard line or so, between the 10-yard line and the goal line, really. And nobody moves until the ball is caught or it hits the ground, and then away you go. The kickoff receiving team and the kickoff coverage team are lined up close together, so you don't have big, long run-ups before they run into each other. And this, in theory, will create more returns in a safer environment while preserving more or less the aesthetic of the kickoff. Because that, I think, has been the big hurdle when the NFL has been looking at changing things for the kickoff here. They want to make sure that they preserve what the kickoff looks like. Football games, for as long as any of us can remember, have looked this way. And they want to make sure that games continue to kind of look this way, even if they kick off in a safer environment. And so I think this is a step toward that. It's a way to preserve the kickoff while making it a little bit more safe. So we'll see if that actually works out, and we'll see how it actually plays out with what the Packers have on the field. I have to think it's a good thing to have Keyshawn Nixon, but I wonder if you're not going to see more guys who are just like bigger-bodied, straight-ahead power runner types. You don't ever really see kickoffs with a lot of dancing anyway. There isn't really much use for guys that are juking people a lot or doing things with agility. That's more of a punt return sort of thing. But I wonder if in situations like this, you don't end up with a role on your kickoff return team that is best suited to guys like, to use a fairly old example now, Najee Davenport. Early 2000s Packers, and yes, of course, he had the incident in college involving a laundry hamper. If you know, you know, and if you don't, look it up. Have a little bit of an entertaining afternoon with that one. But he actually was an effective kick returner for the Packers just because he was a big, fairly fast guy who could get up ahead of steam, and good luck to the guy who got in his way. Just put it that way. He would take care of you if you got in his way. And I wonder if this is the sort of thing that is going to get produced by this kickoff return rule, just a big-bodied guy who's great at running in a straight line. You know who would have been really great in this sort of kickoff return environment is Jeff Janis. This is pretty much the ideal for him, just a 220-something pound track star who, once he gets up ahead of steam, there's nobody who's going to keep up with him in the open field. Just another loss for Jeff Janis, just too good for his time. Also, on the special teams front, Greg Joseph apparently is on his way to Green Bay, reported by his agent that he has signed with the Packers. The former Minnesota Vikings kicker, 5 years in the NFL now, one with the Browns, one with the Titans, and the last 3 with the Vikings. Now some real honest competition with Anders Carlson for the kicker spot. The Packers are not standing by Anders Carlson anymore. They did it all last season. They gave him plenty of chances, but this is now the second kicker the Packers have brought in for an erstwhile competition coming this summer. The first, Jack Podlesny, is probably not serious competition for Carlson, but Joseph presumably is, and I think we're going to see an interesting thing play out here in training camp, a real competition at kicker for the first time in a while here. Joseph has been fairly effective in the NFL. The idea is that he's another kind of big-legged kicker, and he has had lots of attempts from long range with fairly mixed results. He was 7 of 9 from 50-plus in 2021, 4 of 10 there in 2022, but 4 of 7 again in 2023. All adds up to 11 of 26 from distance the last 3 years. Last year specifically, he was 7 of 13 from 40-plus, which is, ironically, exactly the same as Anders Carlson. But let's break down his misses real quickly, and I should have done this with Carlson too, but just just for Joseph's sake. His field goal misses last year were 57 yards at Chicago. That same game, he made 2 other kicks from 50 or more yards. A 50-yarder at home, a 42-yarder at Green Bay, a 44-yarder at Green Bay, which was blocked, yay Carl Brooks, a 54-yarder at home again, and then a 49-yarder at Las Vegas. So 4 of his 6 misses were on grass. One of them was blocked. I think that is so 3 of 6, 3 of 5 real kicks there, or 3 of 5 real misses, not including the block, were on grass. I think that's something that merits a little bit of a mention, just considering that a lot of his success has been in a dome, being a Vikings kicker the last 3 years. He also missed 2 PATs last year, one at Chicago, which was blocked, and then one at San Francisco, which he just straight up missed. So 2 of his 8 misses last year were blocks. Also of note, he had an average hang time on his kickoffs last year of 3.91 seconds. Anders Carlson averaged 3.92, so 1/100th of a second difference between Carlson and Joseph. To me, this looks pretty even in terms of competition. Joseph is probably a slightly more polished version of what Carlson is supposed to be. It's just going to come down to consistency this summer, and probably consistency from closer in, because that was the real struggle for Joseph last year. We also had the league meetings going on this week. I will probably do more on that next time, but there's a decent amount I want to cover on linebackers, and there was some stuff we had to mention with the kickoff rule and Keyshawn Nixon and Greg Joseph and all that. But the biggest news for me is that Brian Gutekunst is extremely pro Jordan Love extension, which is not a surprise, but also if there was any remaining thought that the Packers would try to wait this out and see how he does this season, and since they have him under control and this, that, and the other thing, I think that should be put to bed now. I would expect in the first couple of weeks after the draft that we're going to hear about a Jordan Love extension. If not right after the draft, surely like right at the start of training camp. That was always a Packers tradition for a while. Right around the start of training camp, they would do one big extension. So really you're looking at Jordan Love or Kenny Clark, if you're in the neighborhood for extensions. But those are the 2 big ones that we'd be looking for at this point. So if the Packers are making contract moves, it would be either Love or Clark. But all of that pales in comparison to the real topic today. We've got to talk about linebackers, of course. An interesting class of linebackers overall. I wouldn't say great overall, but there are some interesting prospects. And this has been, I had this later in the notes, but this is something that I've been working on the last couple of years, and I haven't really gotten there yet. But I think I need to keep working to mentally adjust what I think of as a linebacker and as an NFL linebacker. And the Packers right now are not a good example for us because their top linebacker is Quay Walker, who we've repeatedly referred to as kind of a one-of-one on this team. There's nobody who's as big or as strong or as athletic as he is. He moves like nobody else. He can do things that nobody else can do on the football field. What he actually does with that athleticism notwithstanding, he's not really who you want to be looking at as the archetype for your linebackers because almost nobody is going to measure up to that. But it's worse than that, I think, if you've been a longtime football fan, or maybe if you're just a big dum-dum like me, because the 3 real anchor points that I have for thinking about linebackers are 2 NFL players and 1 guy who's completely fictional. But the guys that we heard of as the gold standard, if you grew up in the era that I did, were Brian Urlacher and Ray Lewis. Both of them unique players in their own way. Brian Urlacher, a phenomenal athlete. Ray Lewis, one of the meanest, most prototypical linebackers you could ever imagine, just a big, strong dude who did stereotypical linebacker things, was a physical force, was an intimidator in the center of the Ravens' defense, embodied that defense that won them a Super Bowl in the early 2000s. That's really who you had to look at if you were growing up and trying to figure out who the good linebackers were in the era that I did. And then you've got Jon Favreau's character from The Replacements, who is a complete psychopath who will just do whatever needs doing on the football field and, just is going to be a complete lunatic on the field and take out anybody who's in front of him. And I think, that's not real, but some of that bleeds over into our understanding of the game. Stuff like that does impact what we look for in your player archetypes and things like that, because there's a reason that characters like that, and maybe you don't agree if you haven't seen the movie or took something else away from it, but there's a reason that you can put a character like that in the movie and it resonates with people, because I think if you played football at any level, you've known people who are like that, and a lot of times they tend to be linebackers. The system that the school that I played for in college used actually had 5 linebackers on the field, and 2 of the 5 at any time were going to be players of that type. There are 3. They played a 3-down lineman front, 5 linebackers behind it, and 3 defensive backs, and just tried to create chaos on the field. And your 2 farthest outside linebackers were like hybrid safety linebacker type players, but they called them dogs in the scheme of the defense. And it was just so accurate because everybody on the roster who played that role was just an absolute dog. And I mean this, they were my teammates, they were guys that I knew, so I mean this in love, but they were all just the grimiest, grittiest little dudes that you could imagine, but they would get up in your face. They were all special teams aces. They were all kind of had that mentality, like they were willing to sell out and do anything on a given play. And I think that kind of is the linebacker mentality that you're looking for. But kind of blending all that together and finding that linebacker in the draft or in, a given year's draft, in any year's draft, is hard because college football is so different than NFL football. The geography of the field is different because of where the hash marks are. The responsibilities are going to be different. The physicality of the players is going to be different. So all that to say, there are struggles that I have just from a mindset perspective on what you think of as a good linebacker. And then there are real-world issues with finding good linebackers in the draft because of how different the two games are and where the two games are headed. Because I think that the college game is heading more and more to the ultra-fast spread stuff, which means players are getting smaller and smaller, which shows up in the NFL and defensive line issues and stuff like that. But it affects linebackers too. All that to say, it's difficult to use our methodology to find linebackers in a rigorous sort of way, especially this year. We use a combination of athleticism and productivity for linebackers like we do everywhere else, except figuring out what productivity actually is at linebacker is really, really hard. You can't use tackle numbers. You can't use even tackle for loss numbers because of different responsibilities and things like that. Getting into grades is a little bit difficult because of, just how differently everybody plays. And if you just want to use counting stats, again, you run into stuff like tackles and the ball hawks that we end up using being a bit of a problem, but I think it's about the best we've got. So we look for a combination of guys who have an athletic threshold of 8 or higher, a relative athletic score threshold of 8 or higher, a speed score of 100 or higher. Same as with running backs. You want to be able to move your mass because we're looking for bigger-bodied guys. You don't just want safeties playing linebacker. And we look for guys who have 15 or more career ball hawks. So that number that we track at thepowersweep.com, sacks, passes defensed, interceptions, and forced fumbles, all of those are plays on the ball. Throw them all into a bucket, call them ball hawks. We want 15 or more over the course of your career. So kind of a low level for playmaking and stuff there, but it feels like it does get you some guys worth talking about. The funny thing is, because of the athletic limitations or athletic testing limitations of this year's class at linebacker, that gets us only Tier 1 prospects. We had 18 linebackers in our sample from when I gathered my data on who was in the top 250 by the consensus mock draft board. Only 9 of those guys had enough athletic testing data to actually generate a relative athletic score, and 6 of those 9 met our Tier 1 thresholds, and that's it. You didn't have any guys who were kind of middling athletes that were also productive. You had no guys that were just super-duper athletes that were not productive at all. It's just those 6 guys that hit the athleticism threshold and were also productive in college. But we're going to have to drill down into that productivity a little bit. The one guy I wish we could have gotten some numbers on is Jeremiah Trotter Jr., but he did not test at the Combine and was dealing with a hamstring issue at Clemson's Pro Day, so got no numbers on him. He was very, very productive in college, but a little bit on the small side. And back to what I was saying about what you think of as a linebacker, small is even a tough one because linebackers are just getting smaller. In my mind, I want a guy theoretically who's like in the 245 to 250 range. There aren't any of those guys in the draft this year. There are 2 guys among the 18 that I looked at in our sample who played at 240 or heavier in college, or weighed 240 or heavier at the combine. Jalen Ford out of Texas was 240, and Curtis Jacobs out of Penn State was 241. That's it. Everybody else was 239 pounds or lighter, and most of them much lighter, in the low 230s most of the time. In terms of needs, the Packers do have some, and I don't know if they're even looking for a specific kind of guy. They probably just need more help at linebacker. Because right now you've got Quay Walker heading into his 3rd year, after which they're going to have to decide on his 5th-year option. So potentially he could only have 2 years left in Green Bay under contract. You've got Isaiah McDuffie, who, while solid, is probably not a long-term solution at the position. You've got Eric Wilson, who is not going to embarrass you on defense, but you'd prefer if he was only a special teams player. And then there's Christian Welch, who literally is a special teams only player. They need more options at linebacker, so it wouldn't be surprising to see them take one at some point. So who are our 6 contenders here? The first is Edgerrin Cooper out of Texas A&M. He was number 42 on the consensus mock draft big board at the time that I looked all this up. 6'2", 230 pounds, 9.26 relative athletic score, and clocked a 111 speed score on the strength of his running at 230 pounds. 21 ball hawks in his career, 8.5 sacks, 8 passes defensed among them. Everything you read about this guy mentions his aggression. Big-time run-and-hit guy, and he can run, that's for sure. Moves well at 230 pounds and has pretty decent size overall. 6'2", 230 is not huge, but it's not teeny-tiny like some of the quasi-linebacker really safeties that you see in college football from time to time. The knock on him is that he can be over-aggressive. And I don't know if you ever really get punished for that in college the same way that you will in the NFL. But if you are overly aggressive, if you're a guesser, if you're a guy that's making plays just with his athleticism, not with diagnosing keys and stuff like that, you will get found out. That is a guaranteed fact in the NFL. They will find you, they will make you pay, and you will quickly become a liability that your team cannot have on the field. Fun fact about Mr. Cooper, he is a bit of a workout warrior, won the Aggie Award at Texas A&M for his work in the weight room as a redshirt freshman. Next up is number 46 on the big board, Peyton Wilson out of North Carolina State, 6'3" and 7/8, just a hair under 6'4", 233 pounds. Size-wise, almost a carbon copy of Devondre Campbell, right there in the same height-weight sort of range as Campbell was. 9.81 relative athletic score, 120 speed score, very, very good. 4.43 40-yard dash at 233 pounds. Not bad at all, Mr. Wilson. 36 ball hawks in his career, second most in the class, 15 career sacks, most notably among those numbers. He is Mr. Productivity. I don't really know what we want to make of guys who are racking up a bunch of sacks, but even if we eliminated them from our numbers, he would have easily cleared the threshold because of how many plays he has made in the passing game. He also, to me, is the most intriguing height-weight combo in this sample that we've got this year. You combine that with his athleticism, it looks like you've got a good prospect here. Injuries really do seem to be the issue for him. He missed all of his first season at NC State because of a high school knee injury. Then he played only 2 games in 2021 because of a shoulder injury. It is hard to balance that out. I don't know if it's actually a negative or just something that has happened to him, but I do have to say that when healthy, I think is the scariest descriptor in football. He's a great player when he's healthy, which usually means he's not healthy all that often. He has had a fairly clean bill of health the last couple years, but he does have a couple big injuries in his history. Fun fact on him, his brother's a pitcher in the Brewers system. Not that new of a fact or that noteworthy really, but too fun to pass up. Just has a pro sports family, Bryce Wilson, his brother. Next up is number 100 on the big board, and you can start to see some clustering here. You've got Edgerrin Cooper and Peyton Wilson at 42 and 46. You've got Cedric Gray out of North Carolina at 100, and then you've got 2 players coming in at 143 or 145 and 153. So you really got a couple levels here, kind of late 40s, about 100, and then about 150 is where your value is going to be at this position if my way of looking at linebackers is correct. Maybe it's not, Probably isn't, but it's the best I think that we've got in terms of setting some thresholds for these guys that make some kind of sense. Gray, 6'1", 234 pounds, 818 relative athletic score, 100 and change, like fractional change speed score. A 4.64 in the 40-yard dash is the second slowest among the guys that we have 40s for in this year's draft class. 31.5 ball hawks in his career. He's got all-around good stats with good athleticism. Let's call it good enough athleticism. And to me, Gray screams mid-round linebacker. The size, the numbers, the production, good but not great. And I think it'd just be fun if they had a Quay and Gray combo. The knock on him is, I think, just his size more than anything. And I know that we've talked about size being a bit confusing. He does have a little bit of tweener size. Some people think he might be an edge rusher. I saw that mentioned kind of offhandedly in a couple different scouting reports. I would say at that size, he's going to be an off-ball linebacker in the NFL for sure. He can rush the passer and has at UNC, but as a primary thing in the NFL at 6'1" and 234 pounds, I would need a lot of convincing. Fun fact on him, he only played 3 years of high school football and 2 years of that on defense. He was very productive on offense, 143 catches for just under 2,500 yards and 27 touchdowns in his high school career. Trevin Wallace out of Kentucky is our next prospect at 145 on the big board, 6'1", 237 pounds. Another very fine athlete here, 9.54 relative athletic score, 114 on his speed score, but just 16 ball hawks, very borderline on his production. We had a couple of those guys that were real close to not making the cut production-wise. Gray was borderline on athleticism. Wallace here is borderline on production. He looks like a career special teamer to me in a good way. Just that size and speed profile. Just looks like the sort of guy that you make into a missile on special teams, though, admittedly, we don't really know what special teams looks like for what? Now a third of special teams? You don't really know what kickoff coverage and kick return looks like at this point anymore. That's going to change the composition of some rosters with those units being different with how they're used, especially kickoff coverage and kick return. So maybe put a little bit of a pin in that when you talk about guys as future special teamers. He has the most concerning production profile, I think, of anybody in this draft class. 16 ball hawks in his college career, but 10 of them were sacks. That dovetails with what Pro Football Focus had to say about his overall scouting profile. Got absolutely hammered in their coverage grades. By far the worst graded aspect of his game, according to PFF. Just does not make plays in the passing game. Well, at least not in coverage. He gets after the quarterback. He's active as a run defender, but through the air is not his strength. Doing things in coverage is not his strength. Fun fact, though, this is the only nickname-related fact I think we've had so far this year. His nickname is Duda. They gave no explanation for that in his Kentucky, fun facts section, his personal life section. Just mentioned his nickname is Duda, D-O-O-D-A. Make of that whatever you will. Next up is prospect number 153, and I'm sorry if your mom's listening to this one, I'm going to butcher your name, Adefuan Ulofoshio, maybe, out of Washington. Let's call him Eddie, Mr. Eddie here, 6 feet tall and a half inch, 236 pounds, 9.66 relative athletic score, 109.1 speed score, and 21 ball hawks in his career. The best part of him in his story, and I'll let Pro Football Focus tell it here from their scouting report on him, quote, just a 2-star linebacker recruit, Ulofoshio joined Washington as a walk-on. He eventually became a starter and battled through a torn biceps and a torn ACL in the 2021 and 2022 seasons. His perseverance paid off as he started all 15 games for a Huskies team that made a national championship run in 2023, end quote. So yeah, you got to be a pretty good player to make that kind of run from walk-on to starter on a national championship appearance team. He seems to have been a core part of a very, very good Washington program over the past couple of years. Kind of same deal as Peyton Wilson, though, on the bad stuff. Just the injuries. Those are two pretty big ones. A torn biceps probably not going to mess you up long-term, but a torn ACL possibly could. Just the sort of thing that you'd want to keep an eye on. It doesn't bother me if teams are giving him a clean bill of health, but it is something that comes up again and again if you read about him. He is probably the most successful high school football player we've looked at so far this year. 43-2 over his final 3 years as a high school athlete 3 state titles, 2 15-0 seasons playing in Las Vegas. So went to school his freshman year in his hometown of Anchorage, Alaska, before ending up in Las Vegas for his final 3 years of high school ball, and came away with three straight state titles as a part of a 9-year run of state titles for his high school. Pretty impressive. We'll close out with something that you probably have become quite familiar with over the past couple of episodes and couple of years of stuff doing draft coverage here at Blue 58. Curtis Jacobs out of Penn State, prospect number 167 on the big board, 6'1" and 3/8", 241 pounds, and surprise, surprise, another crazy athlete from Penn State. 9.21 relative athletic score, 109.5 speed score, but, and this is why he's so far down on the prospects list, not much of a playmaker. 15.5 ball hawks, 9.5 sacks. I think you can fake some productivity, I think is the point of all this, with some really athletic linebackers. It's a lot like running backs, and this is why every year I want to do running backs and linebackers kind of close together, because I think there's a lot of overlap between those two positions. You can get away with a lot of stuff as a super-duper athletic college linebacker that you just can't in the NFL. You can be the whole defense in college by just being a bonkers athlete in a different way than you can in the NFL. It just doesn't quite work that way in the NFL. You have to be smart. You've got to be savvy and know when the offense is trying to trick you, and just you have to do things right with the first time and not just make up with your athleticism. And I think that's where Quay Walker has had a bit of a learning curve in the NFL. You can't just be an athlete. You can't just be an athlete, put it that way. You need to have the right emphasis there. It can't just be all about your athleticism in the NFL. And that's where somebody like Jacobs seems to have fallen short already at the college level, because if you're getting a lot of sacks as a linebacker, that tells me you're probably just blitzing a lot, which is a good use of you as a player if you're a super athlete, but it doesn't necessarily make you a good overall football player. He is a big-bodied athlete, though, 241 pounds, putting up those testing numbers pretty solid and solidly built, which is a bit of a rarity in this year's draft class. However, as we've said, almost no productivity. On top of his 9.5 sacks, he's got 24 career tackles for loss, for whatever that does for you. I thought about including a thing this year where tackles for loss were part of our thresholds, our rubric for looking at these guys. But, man, I can't find a way to make it work. It seems super arbitrary. I know it's all arbitrary anyway, but it just has not. I've not figured out a way to make it make sense to myself. Put it that way. Anyhow, has not been super productive at the college level. Does make some plays beyond the line of scrimmage as a runner or as a run defender, but I think some reasonable production concerns in there as well. Fun fact for him: 3 sisters, one of 4 children, the only boy for his parents in that group of 4. That's linebackers. Not a super exciting class. It does get billed some ways as, being some guys where you might have to look past some of their size issues or their productivity issues. I think it's interesting. I just don't think there's one clear-cut guy or even 2 or 3 clear-cut guys where you say, this definitely is a guy who's going to be a factor at the NFL level. I think that's getting harder to say at the college level, but we'll keep trying. And if we got to keep tweaking the formula for what we look for at linebacker, so be it, because that's the way that we try to do this as well as we possibly can. And I think that the strength of doing draft stuff this way is even if you're not necessarily hitting everything, you're at least being consistent in your approach. So if you can at least be wrong the same way every time, you can learn from that and try to get back on track and find what turns out to be, well, a good thing when you look at a given position. That's the thinking anyway. Does it actually work out? Your guess is as good as mine, but I am going to build in some looking back at past draft classes to see how well we did on predicting good players in the next couple of weeks before the actual draft gets here. In the meantime, that's all I've got for you in this episode of Blue 58. I appreciate you tuning in. I'd appreciate it even more if you'd take a second and share this episode with someone you think would enjoy it. That's going to help more people find the show and get more people involved in this conversation you and I are having about the Green Bay Packers, which in turn is going to help all of us, me included, become smarter Packers fans. And as I always say, smarter Packers fans are better Packers fans, and better Packers fans are what we all want to be. I'm your host, John Meerdink. We'll see you next time on Blue 58.